If I listen to what people say, I would never talk. If I listen to what people say.
What's good, guys? You're here with Nate. This is Crossbeats Production, and thank you for tuning in. I will be going to New Zealand for a week and then I'll be back, but I want to do a tutorial for this week so you guys can kind of see the mixing stage of this 3-part series that I was doing. So first off, we'll go through some of the stuff in FL Studio, which I showed you on the last video. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch it. I'll put that down in the description below. But we'll go through some of the mixing that was finally done in this FL Studio project, and then I'll go straight to Studio One to show you what I did there. And then you'll see in the last part of this tutorial, which is part 3, you'll see the vocal recording and then the final production of it. So let's get into the mixing, and this is really cool. You're going to see a lot of good stuff. Hopefully you'll learn some stuff out of the mixing that I've done here, and then you can go and replicate or do what you need to do on your own music. So without further ado, let's get into this tutorial and we'll have a look at the mixing side. So this track, if you don't remember it, what it sounded like, I'll just quickly play this instrumental here. It's going to be a little bit low on volume, but I'll increase that in the video so you can hear it. Let's play it. Alright, so that's the basis. It kind of does other stuff in the track, but I just want to give you kind of an idea of what the tracks sound like if you hadn't heard it before. There is the full track, well, a demo of it on my video list as well if you want to check that out. But we'll get into some of the mixing. So first off, when you're mixing a track, the main key elements, I guess, of any track really is to make sure that your sample selection or your sound selection is on point. What I mean by that is really think about when you're producing a track, what is going to happen with the end result of this track. Try and think of an artist that you'd like to hear on the track. If you're an artist yourself, try and think in your head how you would actually sing or rap or whatever it is over the actual track in the production phase of the track. So when I'm working on a track, I tend to hum to myself or sing or rap or whatever it is that I need to do to make it work with my head. And then I try and add elements to the track or take away elements if that's needed, if I've added too many, to make it work for me in the end. And that's kind of, I guess, the key to any production or anyone producing music in general. If you create a track that's just too busy or too crazy and there's too many elements going on, it's going to be very difficult for somebody to get in there and actually lay down a vocal without hearing a snare in the middle of their vocal just slapping by, or a hi-hat or whatever it is. You've really got to think about this kind of thing and try and produce. If you don't know how to sing or you don't know how to rap or whatever, if you're just producing purely just so somebody else can do that on your track, then think about it from that perspective. That might help you a lot in your productions and your structure of beats or whatever that you're making. So I guess if you're making it, like instrumentals for just whatever, it doesn't really matter if you're not gonna have an artist. But again, it's something I do to work around stuff. So in this mix, there's very simple elements to it. There's only kind of two main instruments in this, and then obviously the kick, snare, crash, hi-hats, and the sub. But really what I've done here, I've used a layer of the high octave of the synth, which is this section here, and I'll just go to play it. Sorry, that was a low octave, I should say. And then in the other part, this is the high octave section, so we'll play that. So all I've done there is pretty much I've got the same instrument at the start. I'm just putting it 1 octave up so it allows the beat to kind of build up in energy. That's all. Simple as that. It's a main instrument. I like the sound of that kind of rhythm that it had there. The melody sort of really worked for what I wanted, so I was like, all right, cool. What can we do to make it work? So I just put that an octave up. The next thing I did was add this part in here, which I showed you guys in the other video. This is Omnisphere, so that's just another part of the instrument that kind of comes in, kind of halfway through the intro. Now that kind of consistently stays the way it is the entire way through the beat. Like you can see it comes in, goes out, comes in again, kind of in the chorus area. This song didn't really end up having too many choruses, but it was very short and I wanted to keep it kind of fluid and moving. So I just kind of worked with just having these two main instruments and then, pitching it up or down to make the actual track work. So just consider that when you're first mixing your track, think about where you want things positioned as well. Don't have things crowding in the mix because it will definitely start to add up and then you won't be able to put a vocal in there later if you got just too much stuff happening. So let's go into the other part. So we've got the drums here. These are all the drums. Just a tip in FL Studio, if you don't use FL Studio, this, I'm sure it can be done in other DAWs, like for example Studio One has something similar, but it's kind of working in the sense of having an ADSR. So inside of the sampler in FL Studio, you've got this section that allows you to put the in amount and the out amount. So what that is, it's pretty much reducing the length of the kick or increasing it depending on the out, or in the in, it's reducing the transient, so the first part of the kick. So it kind of works similar to the way that your envelope would work. So the attack, the hold, decay, sustain, release, so the ADSR, kind of works similar to that, but it's reducing volume and also reducing the first part of the kick or the last part of it, depending on what you want to do. I tend to use this before anything else, before adjusting these, just purely because I like to adjust the kick and visually see what's happening with it. When you're doing it this way, you can hear it, which is fine, but you can't visually see what's actually happening to the sample or the waveform. So I tend to like to use these first. If I don't get the result I want out of that, then I'll go in and adjust this envelope here by using that. So this is a good way of also turning down the volume of certain instruments. For example, a hi-hat. I notice a lot of hi-hat samples. If you're a producer like me, you get hi-hat samples and they're just way too loud. I use this to reduce the levels. So you can see there, I might actually just zoom in on that a bit, but you can kind of see that is quite a large waveform, and I've actually used this to reduce the volume of it quite significantly. That's at the start of the actual waveform. So it's kind of reducing a little bit of the first part of the transient as well, which is kind of what I wanted. I didn't want it to hit too sharply, and I also want to reduce the volume of it. So that's a tip that you guys can use if you're using FL Studio. Otherwise, use the ADSR. So use your envelope to adjust, your kick or your snare or your bass, whatever your samples that you're using, and that'll allow you to kind of fit them into the timing as well. So it has a lot to do with, when I'm talking about timing, I'm referring to the kick. So the kick is kind of important because the timing of the kick, for example, the shortness of the actual the sustain of this could affect the way that the actual 808 then sounds when the kick's hitting and the 808's playing as well. So if you have an 808 playing, for example, a lot of people like to sidechain their bass to their kick or the other way around, and they try to push the bass out of the way so the kick can come in. That's not entirely wrong to do that. It's not wrong at all. But you can also use things like this, reducing the kick length to allow the kick to really just hit fast and then let the bass come in. And what you do with the bass is just reduce the first part. So you could use this attack here and move the attack forward of the bass and then allow the kick to sit in that first part here. So you'd have the kick sitting here, then your bass would come in. I didn't really need to do that too much because of the way this kick worked with the bass in the first place. But later on, I used sidechain compression to reduce some of the first part of the transient on that bass. So let's get into Studio One, because not a whole lot of stuff was happening here other than me reducing the volume using this in and out section here inside of FL Studio. The other part of the sound selection was just a choice of sounds, like I said, pitching up or down in octave. Okay, so all I've done here, just so you know kind of how to export it as well, is I've put each track on its own mixer channel. So when you export, they all go on their own individual mixer channels, so you can kind of get that all working together. So it lines up with 8 channels. So I've got 8 sounds basically in this particular mix, not a whole lot of elements happening. So let's close out of FL Studio and we'll go into Studio One, which you now see on the screen. So Studio One is where I like to do a lot of mixing, and the reason is because I'm just really fluent with Studio One. I've done a lot of tutorials on Studio One, so if you want to see those on my channel, check them out as well. If you're a user of Studio One, you might get some good stuff out of that. I'm going to continue to do that as well. So with Studio One, I tend to just drop everything into stems. So if you don't know what a stem is, or you haven't heard of that term before, stem is pretty much one sound on one track. So for example, the bass or the 808, it's on its own track. You've got this. So you can see that's playing on its own, and everything else exactly the same sort of scenario. So very straightforward, nothing too technical there. But when we get into the actual sounds and the way I've mixed this, it didn't really take me that long. It was purely based off what I could hear and what I liked. But how I made these decisions is, I guess, sometimes difficult for people who don't understand mixing. So let's get into that. The 808, I left that alone. I had the sound how I wanted it to be. I used Sublab to get the sound, and I kind of, I messed with the envelopes, and I messed with just the way that sound sounded, and that's how it came out. So you can kind of see the waveform is there. It's quite neat. It's quite compressed already. It's not really moving a whole lot. When I play that, now that's purely because they have this thing like sausage fattener in Sublab, and you can pull down the threshold and then just pretty much, smash the crap out of the 808. So there's not a whole lot of stuff happening here. You can kind of see it's very cut off. There's not really much dynamic range, and that's just what the 808 is. It's really smashed in there. So what I've done there to work with it then is, you can see here where the envelope sort of shuts down at the end here, and then it kind of slides up. I'll just move in a bit. You can kind of see it sort of slides up slowly here. This is where the first part of the kick actually hits in, and that allows the kick to breathe a little bit in there. So if I just play the kick as well, I'll play that at the same time. Let's move up to here. Now you can see there's no sidechain compression happening here. I'm not saying not to do sidechain compression, and it's not wrong to not do it or to do it. It really just depends on what you've done to your sounds in the first place to allow them to sit in there right. Let me play the kick on its own just so you can hear that. Now you can hear it doesn't really get lost. Both of them are playing together. There's not a whole lot of stuff happening. You can hear that they're kind of sitting in the right spot, in the right timing. And that's just what it is when you get the right kind of kick and the right kind of bass working together. If you didn't have this kind of thing happening, what you might want to do is then get yourself a compressor and throw the compressor on the bass. This is a typical kind of side chaining technique that a lot of people seem to show on their channels. But I've shown you guys before, you could set the knee up like that, put your attack quite fast, and then set a release in timing with your actual track. So this tempo of the track is 156.404. I like to use crazy BPMs. I like to add the little bits at the end there just because it's really hard then for people to figure out what tempo I'm using. And it also just adds a little bit of dynamic to the track. I don't know. Just the thing I do. I don't know. Whatever. So the attack is here. I've got the release set to, for example, the tempo of the track. So that could be at 46 milliseconds. And then you kind of just let the bass, if you're going to push that out of the way, you could set the sidechain here. I'll put the kick in there, and then I'll just play. So, I mean, even 1 dB or just minus 2 dB roughly of compression on the bass is even making it sound even better. It's really just cleaning it up a bit. But I felt like it worked fine how it was. I didn't really want to do that, so I left it alone in that side of things. But that's just a technique you could use. So just sidechain compression, remember that one if you're having trouble with your kick. It is definitely something, it's a valid way of mixing your track. So if you listen to the parts of the track here, I've got the snare, I think it is, or hi-hat. No, sorry, hi-hat. So let's go have a look at this EQ on the hi-hat. I'll just reduce these down a bit so you can kind of see what's happening. And we'll have a look at this EQ. So FabFilter Pro Q, that's one of the EQs I use a lot of because I like the way it works and it just works well. So I'm reducing some of this stuff here. You'll just have a look. So some of the tops here, just to clean up some of the real high-end, top-end stuff that I didn't really like in the mix. And I knew that my vocal would kind of sit when it's, especially with auto-tune on it, when it's kind of sitting in that space, this would kind of be where it sort of sits. So I figured I'd carve out a little bit for that to go in there early on. Very straightforward, nothing else. And I've just got some plate reverb being sent to a bus here, which you can see in this section here. It's lit up in white. So that's that. That's all the EQ that's on the drums. These are the drums here in a bus. Let's just play that. Now, I'll go to the gain staging part of this because there's something that I want to show you, a real secret, I guess, that I kind of use on a lot of tracks, and that's pink noise. Pink noise is something that you can use to mix your track, and you can also use it as a balancing tool. So when I do a pink noise mix, basically, if you haven't seen this kind of thing before, I might actually do another tutorial on it, but pretty much turn the pink noise on, and then I get it at a certain level. So for example, this is set to -6. I'm not gonna, yeah, it's quite loud, so you can kind of hear that. That's the pink noise. So at -6, I'll just turn that on, and I'll level the instruments so I can just hear each sound over or just under the pink noise. So you can hear that going on, and then you have an instrument being played, and you should just be able to hear it over the sound of the pink noise. So that's kind of a way I level my tracks, and it works fantastic. And it's a really good way of getting the right sort of levels for all of the instruments in the mix. And in the end, you'll kind of see, I'll turn that on, but I'll just turn this down. Just turn the output off. So you can kind of see on the meters, let's just get a meter up here. This is the curve of pink noise. So generally you should see in every single mix, in pro mixes especially, you see that they have a kind of a mix that kind of tilts down like this. Not all the time, but it generally has a slope somewhat like that, and you can kind of see the bass and all of that sort of stuff is usually the loudest part because it's creating the most force. The bass are usually the strongest that create that amplitude there. So you can kind of see it's really going downwards on a slope. And the high-end frequencies, you want to have the higher stuff, lower volumes, and the lower volume stuff. So for example, the low-end stuff, a little bit higher in volume because it's perceived a bit differently to the ear. So pink noise is a method, as every other tool is, of mixing a track, and that's something I use on a regular basis if I'm just trying to get the levels right. So I'll just play my track and I'll show you what it looks like on the meter as well, so you can kind of see that. All right, awesome. So you can see in this section here, there's a little bit of a dip, and that's exactly what I was after because my vocal was going to sit in that space. I had already intended to sing or rap on this track, so I figured I'd need to leave a space in this spot here. And you can see the low end here was just a little bit too loud, but I was able to edit that later on inside of the actual mastering. Sorry, I should say more of the mixing, but the final master as well, I kind of dipped out some of the lows here and just really worked it to suit the track style. It's definitely something that you can fix a little bit later on. You can come back into the mix and alter that as well. So that's kind of cool. A neat little thing there. I just wanted to show you the pink noise trick. I'll do another video on that as well. It's definitely worthwhile to learn how to use pink noise if you want to get a really high quality static mix, and pink noise is a way to do that. So static mixing. We'll get into that as well. I actually might split this up into a 4-part series because this mixing aspect of it's going to take a bit. But the other part of this is the synth section here. So I'm just going to move my mic so get in close to it. All right, so we've got the synth section on. This is the EQ that I've got on the synth. It's just getting rid of some of the lows and some here at 290. And that's pretty much this instrument here. If I just play that, you'll have a listen to it. So that's not sitting too high up in the mix. You can kind of see the volumes on this meter. If I just move this up a bit, and you guys can see all the meters then. All right, so you can kind of see and hear everything is kind of just positioned right. So we've got these instruments here, which are all into this bus, instrument bus here, and then that goes to the main bus. So except for this one, I kept that out. So let's play the main instruments. Now, there's a little thing I'm doing here. You can see this particular instrument, which was playing, was a higher pitch or a higher octave than this instrument here, which was Omnisphere. Now, that's on purpose because now I can use this without having to EQ too much of it, and it sort of sits in its own spot. It has a different little location in the mix. So if I just solo that and just show you the actual meters here, go with isotope. Actually, I might use this meter here. And we'll just rotate that to the side. All right, awesome. So you guys can see what's happening here. This is the instrument we're just playing on its own. Now you can see it's hollowed out in this space here. That's good because a vocal needs to sit there as well. But let's play this section with it as well and see if it looks different. Now you can see this is kind of filling in a little bit of that space, but the good thing about that is it's kind of in tempo with the track when it's playing. So it could be a good thing to listen to when you're actually rapping or singing over the track as well, because it keeps your timing or your ear on something so you know when to come in or leave out your vocals. So same with a kick or a snare or whatever it is you're listening to, same kind of scenario, but it's not playing all the time. So something there I just wanted to point out, leaves a bit of space between where the vocal should sit. So that's anywhere from about 1.5K to, I don't know, 6K roughly. Somewhere like that. So let's play the entire track and see how that looks on this meter. So you can see that that's leaving a bit of a dip here. And that's the key of really mixing a track to allow a vocal to sit in there. If I was mixing this as a pure instrumental, I may add other additional parts into this track. But for this actual mix, I just left it alone. So the next thing then I've got here is a reverb, which I've just got a little bit of a plate happening. You can see it's only on these three things here. So these three main instruments, which are in the drum kit. So the snare and the two hi-hats. That's pretty much all the reverb's being used for. If it was more than that, I might use sidechain compression on this actual channel here, so the bus. I might actually get some sidechain compression and push the sound out of the way while the kick plays or the vocal plays or whatever, if I was mixing the entire track in here. But I only used it on those three tracks, so just to create some ambience for those three instruments. So that is pretty much it. Other than that, you can see on this main bus, I've dipped out some, which is, actually I'll just explain this. So this is the main instrument bus here. This is dipping out some of the low end frequency from 55 Hertz and below. And then some of the top end frequency from 10K and above. I'm getting rid of some of that as well. And I'm using a shelf here, which goes up to 505 505 Hertz. And that's a shelf there that dips out some of that low end frequency. So let me just show you what that looks like and sounds like. Now, you may notice in the actual mix, you're not using this EQ, then you're going to have some issues with the low end frequencies on the kick and the bass and other things that may play a role in that. So I'm using EQ to reductively get some of that stuff out in the preemptive fact that I know in the end it's going to add up. You know, having the low end here on this bass adds up in frequency. So you can see on the meter, we'll just go back to that as well. So that's really down the bottom end of this track, and then you add the kick into it. The kick just sits right here, so the bottom end right there, the kick sits there. And then if you see the rest of the drum kit come in. So that's allowing a space again for that, but then when it's all finally in there, you can kind of see it all just fills up and then leaves that bit of space that I need for my vocals. So hopefully you guys can learn a little bit out of this, because when it comes down to, you know, mixing your own track, again, like I said at the start, sound selection is kind of crucial in getting the right kind of mix to work for you, and you're not having to struggle with thousands of plugins trying to make things sound right. That's something I found at the start when I first started mixing. I was really just getting sounds and I was getting EQ, compressing it, putting distortion on these sounds, trying to get them to sound how I wanted to. And at the end, when I actually finally had everything on there, it felt like the sounds had the life sucked out of it. And that was purely because I wasn't choosing the right sounds. It's sometimes hard at the start because you don't know the right sounds to choose, but go and listen to tracks that you like the sound of and try and pick out the instruments that they're using, for example, a kick, snare, hi-hats, and all the rest of it, and see how they're all meshing together, and see how in your track, if you're choosing your sounds for the next track you make, try and get the sounds that you like that would work together in that track, and then try and put them all together and see how much little mixing you actually require because you've chosen the right sounds. So hopefully you guys get something out of this. It is really something that's, I guess, takes time. You have to just get an ear for it. it doesn't come overnight. It's taken me 8 years to get to where I am right now, and I still have lots to learn. I'm not perfect at all, but I do know now how to mix really well and efficiently. And like you can see here with minimal plugins on the actual mix, all I've got here on the final output is a limiter, which is increasing the volume. And then I just put Inside on there just now. I did have a Shadow Hills compressor on there, and I used Pipeline, which is going to an external bus compressor, which is like a, I guess I'll just show you what it looks like. This is the plugin for it. It's Wes Audio Dione, and it's a SSL style of compressor. So that's my final bus compression that I'm using. And I was literally just tapping it just to get some of that compression on the final mix. But really that's the only thing. So I've got compression and limiting on the final bus. And then that goes out to Logic for recording the vocal. I like the auto-tune that they've got in there for free, and I didn't want to pay for it. Cheapskate myself. I didn't want to pay for the auto-tune to do it inside of Studio One because they don't have anything in Studio One for that sort of thing right now. I will do another thing where I have auto-tune, and I'll show you guys how to record vocals in Studio One. So if you like that sort of stuff, stick around for more videos, but we'll go to another series on this one, part 3. Recording the vocals in the next video, and I'll catch you guys at that one. Peace out.